Sorry about that. Again, welcome to everyone to this session on how to achieve an equitable energy transition in extractive-based developing and emerging economies. This event is hosted by the European Union and organized by the OECD's Development Center, Chatham House, Carbon Tracker, and the Commonwealth Secretariat. And I want to thank, on behalf of the organizers, everyone for their good cooperation. Let me start by introducing the Secretary General of the OECD, Mr. Matthias Cormann, who has honored us with his presence here today. And Matthias, the floor is yours for your introductory remarks.
Thank you very much, Rica, Deputy Director General Woersdorfer, ministers, distinguished guests, and colleagues. Thank you very much for inviting me to open today's COP26 side event, How to Achieve an Equitable Energy Transition in Extractive-based Developing and Emerging Economies. Particular thank you to the Carbon Tracker Initiative, Chatham House, and the Commonwealth Secretariat for co-organizing this event with our own OECD Development Center. And thank you also to the European Union for hosting us in your pavilion today. Addressing climate change, as we all know, is a truly global challenge which requires global leadership, global cooperation. Recent momentum in terms of increased political ambition from countries around the world to address climate change is, of course, encouraging. However, we must translate that ambition into real outcomes. We need a lifting of ambition and effort focused on getting to global net zero in a way that is effective and fair. Effective in that those efforts in individual jurisdictions actually lead to a reduction in global emissions and do not just shift emissions from one part of the world to another part of the world. And fair in that every country carries an appropriate, proportionate, and verifiable share of the burden. We also must ensure that all relevant public policy kicks in the same direction, which means we need to reform policies that send contradictory and distorting signals to markets and to consumers. And all countries face challenges in the net zero transition, but emerging and developing countries do shoulder a disproportionate share of the work, particularly those that are dependent on fossil fuels for income, energy, and employment. Equally, the drive towards net zero presents an opportunity to improve our economies and societies with an industrial innovation transformation, including and in particular for developing countries. Minerals-based economies can benefit from rising demand and investment in mining while they decarbonize and increase their participation in responsible global supply chains for the high-value minerals needed to produce clean energy technology. The increasing cost competitiveness of renewable energy sources will help reshape markets and foster business transformation in developing countries. The OECD is fully committed to the goals and the ambition of the Paris Agreement. However, equitable pathways towards net zero still need to be defined for developing countries, particularly those that are extractive-based. Many fossil fuel export-based emerging and developing economies face common challenges. Under a net zero scenario, these economies are likely to face a 51% reduction in oil and gas export-related government revenues between now and 2040, with annual per capita income from oil and gas falling by about 75% by the 2030s. So these are economies which will need to build the capacity to both manage macroeconomic risks and support the structural economic transition. If governments do not adequately prepare for these revenue losses, planning for this transition, they will face significant fiscal pressures, undermining their capacity to meet public expectations on public service delivery, which in turn risks causing social tensions. They will also need to seize the opportunities that renewable energy and clean technologies can offer, including delivering universal energy access, enhancing energy security, incentivizing innovation, and supporting green industrialization. In the case of Africa, for example, the creation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement and the Africa Union's vision to industrialize Africa could be a powerful tool to achieve net zero if matched by targeted national production transformation strategies business development, and adequate technology transfer and development finance. Developed countries have a key role and responsibility here to help set equitable pathways. The OECD has been assessing progress towards the annual $100 billion US climate finance target to be provided and mobilized by developed countries for developing countries. And we know, of course, that in 2019, the most recent year for which there's backward-looking verified data, developed economies were $20 billion short of that 2020 target. However, the good news is that based on further commitments received from donor countries over the past few months and revised projections of future climate finance provided by multilateral development banks, we believe it is now likely that developed economies will achieve and probably exceed that $100 billion target in 2023, with further increases throughout 2024 and 2025. It's of course critical that countries deliver on those commitments. And another bit of good news is that the OECD Development Assistance Committee has, in the lead up to the COP26, also made a landmark decision and a landmark declaration which commits the 30 members of the OECD Development Assistance Committee to supporting partner countries' plans to deliver a just and equitable transition towards net zero by aligning all official development assistance, which totaled $161 billion in 2020, with the Paris Agreement. This decision signals an end to new ODA for unabated international thermal coal power generation by the end of 2021, effectively greening all official development assistance for energy. But to support our net zero transition, we must also mobilize more private investment. We're promoting, I should say, the use of innovative finance, including blended finance and green and sustainability bonds to accelerate this. We're also advancing the OECD Foreign Direct Investment Qualities Toolkit project, which is designed to support governments in targeting and improving the contributions of foreign direct investment to decarbonization and green growth commitments. Beyond financing, development cooperation and ensuring the right policies are implemented is, of course, critically important. Governments in developing countries face major pressures in updating their national development strategies at the same time as achieving net zero. But through our production transformation policy reviews, the OECD supports governments by identifying how to strengthen anticipation and adaptation capacities and how to foster trade, innovation and investment to transform their economies towards more environmentally sustainable pathways. Today, we look forward to hearing from ministers from emerging and developing countries on what just, equitable, low-carbon development pathways could look like to support energy access, poverty reduction, and broader sustainable development objectives. Your insights will be crucial to inform the OECD's equitable framework and finance for extractive-based countries in transition. So with those few words, let me turn the floor to Ms. Naidur Erin Anodotir, or Raga for short. I'm sure that I've really marbled that. Sorry, Raga, our director of the OECD Development Center. Thank you. I'm really sorry for that mispronunciation, but it's a very complicated name.
No worries, Matthias. Secretary General, thank you very much for your opening remarks. Indeed, as you have said, the aim is to ensure that ambitious action on climate is pursued in a way that it's effective and fair. And this is precisely what we hope to unpack in the next hour as we discuss what an equitable pathway towards a low carbon economy could look like for the extractive-based emerging and developing economies. And in this regard, I'm delighted to introduce the panel of esteemed ministers from Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East, who will share their perspectives here today. And they are His Excellency Juan Carlos Bermeo Calderon, the Minister of Energy and Non-Renewable Natural Resources from Ecuador, Dr. Saladin Al-Haditi, who is representing His Excellency Dr. Ali Alawi, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance from the Republic of Iraq, who unfortunately was unable to join us here today, but Dr. Al-Hadidi is representing him here, and he's the minister's advisor. Then we have Mr. Alibek Kvantirov, Vice Minister of National Economy from the Republic of Kazakhstan, and His Excellency Timi Pre Silva, the Honorable Minister of State for Petroleum Resources from the Federal Republic of Nigeria. These four ministers represent important producer countries. Together, they account for just over 9% of total global crude oil production, and they are significant suppliers to the European Union, accounting for 24% of the EU's total crude oil imports in 2019. They will need to prepare for the projected decline in oil, gas, and coal demand due to reduced consumption in advanced economies and cost competitiveness of renewable energy sources, while also trying to decarbonize their own economies and meet climate, universal energy access, industrialization, and sustainable development objectives. This is no easy task, as you can hear. But to begin, given the critical importance of international cooperation and support measures to make this transition happen, we are privileged to be joined by Ms. Mechthild Wösterwer, the Deputy Director General from DG Energy of the European Commission, who will deliver a keynote address to kick off the discussion here today. Mechthild, I give you the floor. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Raga, and thank you for inviting me to this distinguished panel. Good afternoon or good evening already to everyone. I think we are all virtually together, which is very good and very interesting. I couldn't go to Glasgow today, so I'm joining here from Brussels. It's a pleasure to be with such distinguished guests, and we all know that COP26 is coming at a really pivotal moment. We had, at least in Europe, but I think also globally, a summer of devastating floods, record heat waves, and deadly wildfires, which has brought and showed us again the urgency of the climate crisis to all of us. We also know earlier this year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Assessment was quite stark. Act now, or it will be too late to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. We have a small amount of time left, but the window of opportunity is rapidly closing. I've spent 3 years in the IEA and the International Energy Agency, who also came out in May with a roadmap of net zero by 2050, who also says there is a way if we all change globally, developing countries, developed countries, there is a pathway if we act basically now. In that, the European Union is proud to be at the forefront of ambitious global action on climate change. By 2050, all the 27 EU member states together, we plan to transform ourselves into the world's first climate neutral continent. And already in July this year, a few months ago, when we launched the European Green Deal, we also introduced a raft of policy measures aiming at cutting greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030. And there's a lot of focus of accelerating clean energy transitions with renewables, with energy efficiency, and other low carbon fuels. We at the European Union, we intend to lead by example. We all know if we do not wind down fossil fuel production and consumption, our efforts to limit warming to 1.50 Celsius degree or well below 2 degrees are doomed to fail. Many of you will be aware of our recent call to hold exploration for oil and gas in the Arctic and our intention to ban imports from that region should production continue. One of our proposals, which came out in July, and I know it's pretty much discussed also in Glasgow because it has an international dimension, we want to introduce, that it's a proposal, a carbon border adjustment mechanism from the EU to third countries for those who are not having similar measures like the EU has. And that means we will impose from 2026 a carbon price on certain imported goods, such as iron and steel, cement and fertilizer, to avoid pushing carbon-intensive production, which we have in Europe, to outside of Europe. And as part of our methane strategy, we intend to introduce regulation before the end of this year, which will make EU oil and gas market access conditional on meeting stricter monitoring, verification, and reporting standards. We feel that methane emission, and I know it was also discussed in the World Leaders Summit at the beginning of COP, where now more than 100 countries or regions joined this methane pledge to reduce methane emission by 30% by 2030. EU and US had launched that, but we are very pleased that so many other countries have by now joined this pledge so we can work together. But this also means that oil and gas multinational in joint ventures with national oil companies need to show that they are curbing emissions to enter the EU market. We believe this is the right approach. It recognizes the scale of historic emissions across the EU, as well as our higher capacity, including that of multinationals we are home to achieve net zero faster than many other countries across the world. EU climate policies will have profound implications for the economies also of emerging and developing countries, particularly fossil fuel producers. 3 of the countries at this panel, Iraq, Kazakhstan, and Nigeria, account, as it was just said by Raga, for almost a quarter of total EU crude oil imports. And as we had heard from Mr. Corman, the Secretary General of the OECD, at the outset, producer countries could face a drastic drop in fossil fuel export revenue and per capita income through to 2040. In this context, we recognize the urgency to step up efforts to support fossil fuel developing countries through their transitions in terms of technology transfer, capacity building, and new sources of finance. Fossil fuel producers also need to consider how they can position themselves to take advantage of the new opportunities arising from the transition. And I would like to underline that we shouldn't see it as a problem or as a challenge. It's also an opportunity for the countries. And if I can give an example of renewable energy, that can be a powerful driver of job creation, solar, wind, other renewables, or renewable hydrogen, much more than oil and gas. And the exponential growth in deployment of new clean technologies, such as battery storage or electric vehicles, which we see globally, that will lead to a substantial uptick in demand for critical minerals, as also Mr. Cormans mentioned. And as we are transforming our energy and industry systems, we remain committed to reducing the pressure we place on these resources through efficient management throughout the life cycle and the recycling of waste into secondary critical raw materials, where the value of products, materials, and resources is maintained in the economy for as long as possible, and the generation of waste is minimized. However, we also need to secure a sustainable supply of raw materials to feed our automotive, renewable energy, defense, and aerospace industries and markets. Developing countries should capitalize on these opportunities, but in order to do so, we need to work together to ensure responsible sourcing practices and shape sustainable supply chains from extraction to waste management. The European Commission is committed to establishing collaborative, mutually beneficial partnerships to accelerate a just and equitable transition in extractive-based developing economies, providing the support that is required to build capacity, enhance innovation and transfer of technology, and enable access to finance. Through initiatives such as the Africa-EU Energy Partnership, and energy-focused memorandum of understanding with Central Asian governments, including Kazakhstan, we are already now working to further the objective of energy access, energy security, affordability, and sustainability with partner governments. Operational partnerships such as joint ventures in the oil and gas sector also offer powerful mechanisms for international oil companies from EU countries and national oil companies in emerging and developing countries to collaborate. Such partnerships can be used to share best practice and expertise on emissions abatement, as well as to foster technology transfer. Recently, the EU, alongside with other members of the OECD Development Assistance Committee, DAC, reiterated its commitment to meeting and scaling up the US $100 billion per year to support developing countries implement plans to meet global climate objectives. And so what we hear from COP right now, this is really getting finally into practice, and it should even increase, as Mr. Corman said, by 2024 every year. As co-chair of the OECD Development Center's workstream on low carbon transition alongside Nigeria, we also hope that the EFFECT framework will provide a blueprint for extractive-based emerging and developing countries to accelerate their transition away from fossil fuel. The pathways to net zero will undoubtedly be challenging and quite different across countries and regions. However, I am convinced that we can find the solutions we need to save our planet and safeguard the rights and interests of our people. I very much look forward to discussing these issues today with you. And thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for co-organizing it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mechthild. Very interesting. Moving now to our distinguished panel, but before we begin, just a very practical note. We have a very ambitious agenda here today. We have a very distinguished panel, but we only have an hour, which will go by very fast. The organizers tell me that we will be cut off at when the hour is up. So I kindly ask the esteemed panel to have that in mind and try to limit their interventions to the allotted time. And I will not waste any more of our time. Just to start us off, it would be very helpful to have a shared understanding of the role of fossil fuels in your respective countries. So I would ask just for a short 1 minute reply, the panel to tell me what is the current energy mix in your country, and specifically the share of the fossil fuels. And I would ask Minister Bermeo Calderon to take the floor, please. 1 minute.
Good evening to everybody. My name is Juan Carlos Bermeo. I'm the Ministry of Energy and Mines here in Ecuador. And I'm so pleased to be part of this panel. As you mentioned, I'm going to take less than a minute to keep all under the schedule, okay? Our country is a small country, is around 280,000 square kilometers. Our population is around 17 million people. Regarding the oil industry, the primary energy production in 2000 is around 200 million barrels per day. Of the total produced, is 86% was made up of oil, 4% by natural gas, 9% by renewable energy, which means hydropower, firewood, cane products, wine, energy, and biogas. The pandemic caused by COVID-19 produced us all over the world negative effects in the energy sector. So in Ecuador, our primary energy production was reduced by 8.8% compared to 2019 values. Oil was the energy source with the highest production in the period 2010-2020, was the highest production in oil industry. Oil production in 2020 was around 180 million barrels of oil. So those numbers are just to keep you in the loop of what Ecuador means around oil and gas. Oil exports are also suffered a reduction of 126 million barrels compared to 2019. Of the total oil production, around 30% is committed to the internal consumption, 30%. And 70% of the oil production is to exportation. The share of renewable sources in primary energy production is less than oil and natural gas. And let me emphasize this. The share of renewable sources in primary energy production is less than oil and natural gas. However, the production of renewable energy is registered growth of 180% between 2010 and 2020. 180% of increase the renewables, mainly due to the growth of hydroelectric generation. Hydropower generation means more than 90% of the total energy consumption in Ecuador on a daily basis.
Great. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Minister. A minute goes by very quickly. Being a former minister myself, I know it's difficult. You have a lot to say, and I will give you the floor later on. But moving now to Iraq, Mr. Saladin Al-Hadidi.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your invitation for this event. And I am going to take less than 1 minute in this question. Iraq heavily depends on the fossil fuel and getting public revenue. It's represented 90% of Iraqi public revenue, and also represented 95% of the exports and around 50% of the GDP. Iraq produced oil more than 4.2, I don't have the exact number right now, but more than 4 million barrel per day, and consume internally around 1 million barrel a day, and the export reach 3.25 million barrel per day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And moving now to Kazakhstan, Mr. Alibek Kwantirov.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's a great honor to participate in this event today. I'll try to be short as well. So by the end of 2020, the share of fossil fuels in today's volume of fuel energy resources was about 74%, and in the structure of fossil fuels, around 45.7% is accounted for oil, 30% for coal, and 24% for natural gas. For coal industry, coal production in 2020 amounted to 108 million tons, and the coal industry provides the production of more than 70% of electricity in Kazakhstan. This helps fully meet the fuel needs for the utility sector and the population. Regarding the oil industry, the oil and gas complex of Kazakhstan play a significant role in the development of the country, forming out about a quarter of GDP. About 80% of the oil produced in Kazakhstan is exported, and the rest is supplied to the domestic market. The largest share of Kazakhstan's oil exports falls onto the export to the European Union, South Korea, China, and Japan. And as for the gas industry, by structure, the gas is produced in Kazakhstan is mainly associated with petroleum gas, and the volume on its production directly depends on the dynamics of oil production. Of the total volume processed gas sales, 62% is directed to the needs of the domestic market, and 38% of it is exported. And Kazakhstan provides over 95% of domestic energy demand. By the end of 2020, the share of imports was just about 5%. And in general, 58% of fuel and energy resources were supplied to the domestic market, 37% for exports. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And moving now to Nigeria, Minister Silva, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Nigeria's current energy mix comprises of traditional biomass and waste, including wood, charcoal, manure, and crop residues, which account for about 84% of total primary production. The rest is from fossil fuels, 15%, and hydropower, 1%. As far as power is concerned, 85% of our power generating capacity is fired by fossil fuel, natural gas thermal power. That is 22 gas plants generating about 11,000 megawatts, while the remaining 15% comes from 3 hydroelectric power plants generating 2,000 megawatts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, and also for being so brief, and to all of you. We have a few questions that I would like to ask you, and the format is I will ask the question, pose the question once, and just go the same round, starting with Juan Carlos from excuse me, Calderon. I'm sorry, the name escaped me. But anyway, setting aside current market volatility, the global shift towards decarbonized economies will lead to structural decline in demand for unabated fossil fuels, increasing cost competitiveness of renewable energy sources, and increased demand for certain minerals. Given the importance of fossil fuels revenues to your country, what risks does this present, and what are the key challenges that you are dealing with? And if you could also share in a few words some of the strategies for managing these risks. And also, if you could, and following what Mechthild Borsterver talked about in her intervention, do you also see opportunities for your country to build a more sustainable, resilient, and diversified economy, and support efforts to expand access to energy while pursuing poverty reduction and overall sustainable development objectives? Long question, and again, we are pressed for time, so if you could limit your interventions to 3 minutes, I would be extremely happy. Mr. Calderon, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. For many years, several actions that have been carried out to change the productive model from economy dependent on oil and change this way of doing business in Ecuador to another industries. But let me tell you that 7.8 or 8% of the GDP, Ecuadorian GDP, comes from oil industry. So it's really hard to switch from oil to a different industry and having the same amount of money for the national budget. Okay? In Ecuador, oil is the main export product, and it comes, and obviously this amount of money finances part of the general state budget. Between 2018 and 2020, it represented, in an average, approximately 28% of the total central government revenue. So regarding the sports, it represented between 2015 and 2020 an average of 32% of entirely exported goods. I'm referring to oil industry, crude oil exportation. It is important to emphasize that in countries with high dependence of fossil fuels, such as Ecuador, such as my country, change must be made from a progressive perspective. It can't be done just one day to another. It has to be done progressively, and it's necessary to have all the collaboration of industrialized countries to mitigate above risks. From the financial fiscal strategies must develop to manage these risks and as well to handle the uncertainty of potential lower revenues from hydrocarbons. Ecuador is a country with natural resources. So what are we doing now is trying to push the mining industry to replace the oil industry right now. Mining has the best future you can imagine in this country. So we're looking for minerals to replace the oil industry at least in the same amount we are having right now for the GDP. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's from your intervention, it's very, you demonstrated well the importance of collaboration between the producing and the consuming countries to mitigate the risk of a substantial decline in fossil fuel revenues for emerging economies, such as Ecuador. So this is very important. But now moving on to Iraq, Dr. Saladin Al-Hadidi. You're muted, sir.
Thank you very much. Regarding Iraq, if the fossil fuel prices or demand decrease in the future, definitely we are going to face a big challenge in the Ministry of Finance. As you know, we have a lesson learned from 2022 due to the coronavirus. And you know that the demand decreased and the prices decreased. We faced a big challenges. And you know, if it's happened in the future, this is very difficult to the Ministry of Finance. We are aware in the Ministry of Finance about this issue, and the Minister of Finance, Dr. Alawi, suggested a reforms paper named white paper and approved by the cabinet, and included many reforms to reduce the expenditure and diversify the economy and encourage the private sector. And one of this issue, we devaluate the exchange rate in our to encourage the private sector to start producing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And moving to Minister Kvantirov, and also we have a question from the audience regarding what the barriers to energy transitions are. Maybe if you can include that in your answer, just to add to the long list of questions.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Raga. So I'll try to touch all the points. So Kazakhstan is quite a big country by territory, so it's number 9th by territory, and it's rich not only on oil but also on coal and other ferrous metals and aluminium. And you know, since we have some OPEC forecast that oil will be still consumed in the numerous decades, nevertheless, the introduction of the by the European Union of a border carbon adjustment mechanism will significantly, of course, affect our exports on different fronts. So especially for oil producers, for ferrous metals exporters and others. So the amount of Kazakhstan's exports losses will, according to current estimates, will be about 200 million euro. At the same time, in addition, Kazakhstan's exporters in the medium-term periods may suffer large losses when expanding the list of items that are subject to a carbon tax, border tax, carbon important taxes. For example, in the coal industry in Kazakhstan, they're working 30,000 people, and it will definitely lead to some cuts in this sphere. So in this regards, new climatic trends are pushing Kazakhstan to raise raise environmental standards and gradually restructure the traditional economy. And as was said by previous speakers, so from one side, these are challenges. From the other side, it is an opening opportunity for us to restructure our economy. And we have been doing this since 2013. For example, the National Greenhouse Emissions Trading System has been implemented in 2013, which is as a part of the update of the Environmental Code, for example. And by the way, starting from July 1st this year, we have a new Environmental Code that entered into force. So, and according to our previous commitments, we were going to achieve reduction of greenhouse emissions by 15% from the 1990s level. And I would also like to note that according to the, so we had a task from the president that to integrate the national system of emissions trading with similar international systems. And the work has begun to bring the national emission trading system closer to European ones. And also recently we adopted the National Development Plan of Kazakhstan until 2025. And according to it, the volume of clean energy will increase by 2 times due to the construction of 13 hydroelectric power plants, 34 wind and 12 solar stations. Besides, we're also planning to plant 2 billion trees on an area of 500,000 hectares in the next 5 years. At the same time, the platform of the Astana International Financial Center will be actively involved. New green financial instruments, including derivatives, will be created. And at the moment, we are working on the draft strategy of achieving carbon neutrality until 2060. And it will present the political, economic, and social foundations for a fair transition to carbon neutrality, as well as mechanisms for socially fair transformation of the economy and the creation of new jobs. Since it's a very sensitive and socially, or maybe politically as well, issue, we, of course, we will need help from our international partners. We will need best practices, and that's why we are working closely with the OECD, with its members, separate members, and we are hoping, of course, that with your help, with the help of your member countries, we will cross this hard line and we will achieve this carbon neutrality as we're planning by 2060. Thank you.
Thank you very much. These are indeed ambitious plans, and I wish you all the best in making them realize. Moving on to Nigeria, Minister Silva.
Thank you very much again. Let me just say that Nigeria is a very large country with a huge population, over 200 million people, and land area of about 1 million square kilometers. The key challenges include the possibility of a structural decline in the price of oil and consequential fiscal vulnerabilities that may arise therefrom. Furthermore, reduction in fossil fuel revenue without sufficient time and support to manage macroeconomic risk and the structural transformation required to build a diversified, sustainable, and resilient economy will have catastrophic social knock-on effects for millions of people in Nigeria. We will struggle to provide energy access to our increasing population, and the energy poverty will have a negative effect on prosperity, quality of life, and overall well-being of Nigerians. We will struggle to access international finance for fossil fuel development, and consequent to the COVID-19 pandemic, are experiencing severe economic contractions and very high level of debt. Nigeria is responding to these challenges in several ways. First, by legislation. The Petroleum Industry Act, which came into existence in August 2021, seeks to preserve existing levels of government take for a transition period through grandfathering provisions. These provisions retain the fiscal regimes that existed prior to the passage of the PIA for a period of 18 months, which enables government to plan and adjust to the reduced income stream that will emerge by the implementation of the new fiscal regime contained in the PIA. The PIA, the Petroleum Industry Act, also proposes a fiscal regime that encourages investment in order to monetize existing reserves before the clock runs out. It does this by providing for voluntary conversion provisions, generous production allowances, lower royalties and taxes, cost optimization focus, etc. Secondly, by the deregulation of the downstream petroleum sector. The regulation has now been enabled by the Petroleum Industry Act, and the government is in the process of fully deregulating the downstream petroleum sector, which will end subsidies and free up funds for national development. In this regard, the government has set the deadline for full deregulation as June 2022, within which time suitable measures to ameliorate the effects of deregulation would have been in place. Thirdly, by the focus on gas. This is at the heart of the energy transition and represents the first step in the journey to renewables away from oil. Already, the government has declared gas as our transition fuel and also a destination fuel, because given the vast reserves we have in country, 203 TCF proven reserves with an upside of about 600 trillion cubic feet, we estimate that this will still form part of the energy mix by 2050. Thus, generous incentives have been proposed in the PIA 2021 to enable development, distribution, penetration, and utilization of gas. These include the reduction of royalty rates to 5% across onshore, shallow water, and deep water. Royalty is further reduced to 2.5% if the gas is to be utilized in the domestic market. Further, the National Gas Expansion Program launched in 2020 to drive domestic utilization of gas for transportation, captive power, and household cooking. This will have a positive multiplier effect on the economy, as it will drive employment, prosperity, improved health, and general populace wellness, and increase revenue to government as a result of increased participation and investment in the midstream and downstream sectors of the energy sector. We are also increasing our domestic refining capacity so that the bulk of what we produce can be utilized in country, thereby saving millions of dollars of foreign exchange dedicated to the import of petroleum products. Lastly, we are diversifying our economy by focusing on the non-petroleum sectors such as agriculture, manufacturing, technology, and solid minerals. Indeed, the petroleum sector currently accounts for about 10% of our GDP. However, this is set to increase with the focus on the petroleum midstream and downstream sectors, and there will be greater linkage with job creation and the prosperity value proposition. And on the opportunities in low carbon, question, within the energy sector, we are actively seeking investment in the renewable space and are working with like minds in this regard. For instance, we were recently approached by the United States Department of State to sign up for the Clean Energy Demand Initiative. This is an initiative through which corporations will send a demand signal for investing in clean energy in countries where they seek to build facilities such as manufacturing and data centers. In return, countries will signal that they will adhere to high-level principles that create an enabling environment for such investments in renewables to occur. As more and more corporations make commitments to cover the totality of their electricity requirements with renewable energy, adherence to CEDI, and ability to purchase clean energy in country may be one tool which corporations will use in making investment decisions. We are considering that the CD, and we revert to the US State Department accordingly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. And as time flies, I just want to remind you that we have about 10 minutes left. So just moving on to the international cooperation on this agenda. And I ask you just to have a 1 minute reply as to how important is the international cooperation on the agenda. And if you could give me the top 3 priority areas where international support beyond bilateral aid would be required for your country to achieve a just and equitable low carbon transition. Minister Calderon, if you could answer this for me in 1 minute, I would greatly appreciate it. While we wait for him, maybe we will turn to Alibel Quentirov to ask you to, you mentioned this in your intervention before, so I am very optimistic that you will do this in 1 minute.
One of the issues that concerns me personally is, for example, we have an oil fund, right, which, where we accumulate all the oil revenues. So it's been working for 21 years already. We have about $60 billion accumulated there, and during the pandemic times and during the crisis of 2007, 2008, it helped the economy really, really well. Actually, this is the fund for future generations, and sometimes it does help us with the crisis measures. But we will be happy to get the experience, maybe if there is such an experience globally, if we get away from oil production, and that's why we will, of course, we will eat up all the accumulations that we have in the oil fund. How we can substitute those? What we will leave for our future generations if we transfer from oil production? So financially, this is a big issue. This will be a big issue for Kazakhstan, and I'm personally concerned about it.
Thank you very much. And I see that Minister Calderon, 1 minute on the international top priorities.
Well, international cooperation is essential to achieve a new development model in low emissions, resilient to the effect of climate change, and move towards a decarbonization of Ecuador through different ways of technical assistance, technology transfer, and support with financial resources. Let me give you a brief example. As consultancy, we need to develop the National Decarbonization Master Plan. That's one of the examples, small example, what we need as a consultancy from international cooperation. We have a lot of public policies must be constituted to enabling framework to productive activities to prepare for the change, and will take place in the long term regarding the use of fossil fuels and the reduction of the impact that it may generate of the Ecuadorian economy. For example, the public oil company in Ecuador, which it's the state-owned company, it's called Petroecuador, is a member of the Regional Association of Companies of Oil, Gas, and Biofuels in Latin America, and it participates in association with working groups and bringing a lot of consultancy and international cooperation to develop plans, programs, and bringing funds to build new infrastructure that the oil industry requires and demands today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Al-Hadidi, the floor is yours.
Okay.
1 minute, please.
Okay, thank you. In Iraq, we have reduce the flaring gas is a very important area. Iraq requested support or international cooperation in. Already we have Basra Gas Company, and we thinking to expand the work to capture a lot of gas before flare. This one, and also there is mission. I'm not a specialist in the oil industry, but there is a negotiation with companies to withdraw the methane from natural gas before use the gas to reduce the methane emissions in Iraq. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Minister Silva, the floor is yours. 1 minute, please.
International cooperation is crucial in achieving a just and equitable transition in Nigeria. Indeed, this was underscored in the recently updated Nigerian Nationally Determined Contribution, in which we pledged a 20% emissions reduction below business as usual by 2030, and a 47% conditional commitment which can be achieved with financial assistance, technology transfer, and capacity building from our international partners who are more advanced and are both willing and able to assist us in this regard. In the recent Sustainable Development Report 2021, Nigeria ranked 160th out of 165 with a country score of 48.9. That report highlighted that Nigeria faces major challenges in 13 out of the 17 SDGs, including SDG 7 on affordable and clean energy provision. Our performance in terms of the SDGs is a very strong indicator that any energy policy of Nigeria should be formulated in the context of improving the achievement of these goals, including reducing poverty and hunger, improving good health, well-being and quality of education, achieving clean water and sanitation, creating decent work and economic growth, and promoting an improved environment, including the deployment of carbon capture technology. These constitute our priority areas for a just transition and for which international support will be sought and welcome. International support must be such that addresses the basic socio-economic challenges of our populace. If it does not focus on poverty alleviation, job creation, and development of new economic opportunities, chances are that it would not be generally accepted. The role and buy-in of the public is crucial to the success of the energy transition in Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is a discussion that is only just beginning, and I can tell you that we could have been here for another hour at least. And I want to thank all of you and apologize for being so strict on the time. I would also like to thank the European Commission and the Deputy Director General for Energy and all of the panelists, all of the ministers for sharing your valuable perspectives on how to achieve a just and equitable energy transition, both internationally and at the country level. I come from Iceland, and I can tell you that only a few decades ago, we relied first on coal to grow our economy after World War II, and then on oil for house heating, and suffered from polluted air as well. But we were in the midst of an economic crisis and strategically decided to give up those energy resources and rather explore alternative geothermal and hydro power generation. So it's to say that in times of crisis, we can turn them into opportunities, and we should never let a good crisis go to waste. And when you reframe the problem and you look at it through a different lens, let me share with you just a couple of main takeaways from this discussion here today. We heard of all of the specific challenges that fossil fuel-based economies are facing in the pursuit of just and equitable low carbon transition, and the need for sufficient time and support for managing the macroeconomic risks that derive from declining fossil fuel revenues, while also undertaking unprecedented structural transformation to build more resilient, diversified, and sustainable economies. The low carbon transition needs to be sustainable in socioeconomic terms as well, and offer a viable alternative development model to fossil fuel path dependence. We also heard the urgency of scaling up the international support in terms of access to finance, technology, and capacity building. And you've also recognized the shared responsibility that the importer countries have to enable a sustainable exit from fossil fuels and outline concrete actions in this direction. And we have also seen, and that was well demonstrated in the views of the panelists, that fossil fuel-based economies are committed to doing their part and are undertaking already concrete actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the fossil fuel production process and the phasing out of fossil fuel consumption subsidies. Our discussion here today provides a pathway for accelerating the low carbon transition through existing or new partnerships between advanced, developing, and emerging economies, and to build on the current international momentum on this issue. And let me just take this opportunity to point to two recent initiatives. Denmark and Costa Rica will launch the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, which aims to bring together developed and developing countries willing to phase out or limit oil and gas extraction with a specific time frame and to support the sustainable transition away from fossil fuels. In addition, in the beginning of this week, the United States, the European Union, and partners formally launched the Global Methane Pledge, an initiative to reduce global methane emissions, which is widely regarded as the single most effective strategy to reduce global warming from the oil and gas sector. And a total of 100 countries responsible for nearly half of anthropogenic methane emissions have now signed on to this pledge, including Ecuador, Iraq, and Nigeria. And of course, we encourage Kazakhstan to follow suit. Lastly, we at the OECD Development Center, we stand ready to support extractive-based economies with planning for the risks and transformational opportunities of the low carbon transition, as well as designing and implementing just and equitable low carbon strategies. There's no doubt that today's discussion has offered food for thought for the development of the effect or the equitable framework and finance for extractive-based countries in transition, which we aim to finalize in time for next year's COP in November 2022 in Cairo. We are at a tipping point to preserve our planet and our future, while each country must contribute in a proportionate manner to the achievement of global climate goals. We need to work hand in hand to succeed together. And I believe that today's discussion is an important step in this direction. Again, thank you, all of you, very much for participating and for everyone who has been watching.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.